I'll hand over to the staff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and apologies to the rest of you if you thought you were about to get away. But we've noted some time considerations, and probably so we will call a halt at 4 o'clock if that's any comfort to anyone. But there are a number now of topics on the agenda that have been that the verbal submissions have now been completed, and so you're perfectly able to go through and make decisions. And the first of those is on page 8 of the agenda, which is around the Regional Vector Control Program for bovine TB. And that was the submissions that we heard jointly this morning from the TB Free Committee and Osprey. Mr. Adey, did you have any other comments you wish to make on that?
Not directly, just to be aware, though, that Osprey are currently going through a funding review for their program, and I understand that we're likely to get an indication of whether or not in the future they will continue to seek regional council funding into that. Is due probably around August. So,
that's right.
Yeah.
It will be about August.
Yeah, just be aware of that.
So this is part of the our budget as it stands. Question. Sorry, Councillor Pye.
When is it that we have an opportunity to debate or discuss the public-private split on that one? At the present time, the private-public split is, 70-30. Is that something that we can look at some stage, or is this the time?
Yeah, absolutely certain for the long-term plan. Yes. Yeah.
Councillor Scott.
The raising of, because we've got the 640,000 identified in the budget as our contribution. You've now raised the suggestion that a funding review could change the funding formula in August. I take it that would have to be funded downwards by us, not up.
We've
got no provision to suddenly increase the budget mid-year.
We will know the draft outcome of the funding review in August. That's probably, but we are committed for another 12 months. Yeah.
Could I explain the funding review? The funding review is actually where the funds come from in the future, because the current arrangements with industry and councils is coming to an end.
Yep. But there's no change in our budget for this year, and there will be no change during this coming financial year.
No, that's correct.
They would know not to do that. That's been an issue they've had with other councils, which has resulted in Waikato actually pulling the funding.
Just the second paragraph under recommendations. At this stage, we will proceed working through this at a staff level until there is some sort of conclusion, at which stage we would bring it to council and certainly expect your input at that stage. But we're expecting it August, September sometime.
Mr. Chairman, move with the a recommendation that there is no change in the plan.
I'll second that.
Further discussion? Put that motion, then all those in favour please say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Carried.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next submission is over the page, on page 9, the a Regional Events Underwriting Fund, and the submitter has requested that the Regional Council contribute to such an underwriting fund, but I think the message that was put across through the verbal submission today was around the beginning of that conversation, and this is really consistent with the recommendation that we've got in here, that this is really a discussion for for the long-term plan and how those kind of these kind of situations are managed, so therefore in terms of the impact on this current annual plan, the recommendation would be no change to that.
Questions? Councillor Dick. Microphone on.
It's worth noting in the resolution that no change, but that this is a matter that can be considered in the long-term plan in consultation with the other proposed funding partners. Can we say that?
Yes, and thank you for reminding me. So for the new councillors, what we do when decisions are made on submissions is that we write individual letters back to the submitters, and they're signed by the chairman, and they normally have that kind of response in there. So, if council's chosen perhaps to take an action that will occur in the next financial year, that's conveyed back to the submitter. So the reasons for the decision and what's likely to happen in the future, even if it's not going to happen straight away. And
in this instance, I would also include carbon copies to the councils and others that may be involved in this discussion. So.
A few years ago, the responses were very bald. The councils decided to make no change to the plan. Virtually one sentence, and just put yourself in the shoes of a submitter and receiving that back. Doesn't do much good.
Do read them. Some recollection of history.
They have always been made available in the councillors' rooms, and although the resolution has been no change, the letter always picked up on thanking for the submission, etc., etc. So nowhere was the resolution was no change in the plan.
You're right.
But the letters were always made available for people to read.
I may not always write
room.
them, in fact, very rarely, but I do make sure that I'm comfortable signing it. So, okay. Is there any other questions around that? And so you're quite happy to move it with that qualification, Councillor Dick? Okay. There's no other questions. We have a seconder for that. Happy to second that. Wish to speak? Other speakers? Councillor Grant?
I'd like to speak on it. I actually think this is a very good idea for a region. So just want to put that on the table. I take in Councillor Scott's view, no underwriter would underwrite anything they didn't know about. So, you would need to have a little group that said this is good or not for the underwriting. But, if we're going to attract things to Hawke's Bay as a region, finding underwriters is just such a difficult thing out of the community, and whether the ratepayers or just as a group underwrite things, understanding the business plan, understand that they're not going to have to write a cheque, or hopefully not going to write a cheque, then I think that's a really good thing. So I just think that, and I haven't discussed this with Colin before, and I suppose I have a conflict because I know him and I work with him, but just basically, fundamentally, I think this is quite a sound thing that we should consider going forward in the future. And I realise you can't make a decision now, but as a fundamental.
Mr. Mohi.
Yeah, I did note that they said twice about the All Blacks and the Hurricanes. They're actually events that don't need to be subsidised because they're almost guarantees. They're really talking about so-called minor events and minor sports to be under it.
Chair, that's not actually true. Some of these big events, like, for instance, that soccer event, that was a high risk.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'm talking about rugby.
Not having a debate.
Not your pufters go.
You chaps. Order. You're bound to offend someone in the room, Mr. Mohi. Other speakers?
I will speak because I did ask him the question and he did skirt around it. If this council underwrote any event at all, it would have to have the final say as to whether they would be in a position to underwrite it, not some group advising them that this is, because it has got councils in the past into underwriting in excess of $1 million of ratepayers' money. I'm sorry, we're accountable for that ratepayers' money, and at all stages we've got to be accountable for the way that ratepayers' money is spent.
Thank you. Okay. Mover, you don't wish to sum up? Good. Good on you, I should say. I'll put the motion in. All those in favour,
Can you
please say...
read the motion back to me?
All right. So the motion would be, two, that no change be made to the annual plan, but that this matter be considered in the long-term plan.
Consultation.
Yes, sorry, yeah.
Yeah. Other funding partners, yeah. Okay, so I'll put that motion in. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Is there room for one more? Considering Councillor Pite, you got room for one more? Okay.
Which will go to page 14, which is the small matter of coastal erosion. Unless you want to pick an easier one. Yeah. No, that's because you've heard from WOW and you've heard from Mr. Crabb, so we can actually have a look at that one. And Mr. Aidy's also here, so he can answer he wrote the officer's report.
Mostly this is an issue of consenting and the perception that consents cost a lot of money. In actual fact, it's not necessarily the consenting part that costs the money. It is the sort of investigations that underlie or go with the consent, and mostly that would be to understand the potential adverse impacts of whatever's proposed and the mitigation options to deal with that. So I think we just need to make sure that people are absolutely clear what we're talking about. The second thing is that, particularly with the WOW group, the Sargent report and Dave Sargent, who was the author of that, made the clear statement that to be successful, or the best chance of success for any consent, would be that a public body was the applicant, and Hastings has really put up the hand to work through that. The key issue for Hastings really is whether or not it is affordable to the community. I'm sort of not quite clear on how we keep getting sort of battered back from Hastings saying that it's all our fault. It really sits very clearly with them to make a decision on whether or not they want to be the applicant for a consent application. Yeah.
I attended a community meeting out at Teawanga a week or so ago. I guess you were still gone. I think the money issue, as I understand it, is, and that's why I asked the question I did, and I wasn't really satisfied with the answer, but their expectation, WOW, in coming in with this corner thing, at whatever that number was, 4 million or whatever the sort of the Band-Aid, is that they do have Hastings on board that, but that the question before Hastings is yes or no, is the shingle available that WOW is saying is now been discovered? And they say at the meeting I was at, they said we've worked with the regional council staff. I'm forgetting his name. Your deputy, who has identified appropriate source of the scale necessary to do that project. And so, based on that, they crunched their numbers and they come up with their 4 million, and that's what they're proposing now to Hastings as a manageable price tag. And it sounds like they have Hastings on board that proposition. So, while they're not asking us for any funding, it sounds like if the signal from this council is yes, the shingle is available at the cost WOW thinks it is, that it's a goer.
And is it?
Well, that was the first time I knew about that proposal, to be honest, when I saw the submission, and I haven't had an opportunity to sit down with Hastings Districts and talk it through. The two areas that they talked about, I know that there is a lot of material available at Merry Road, and that is effectively a byproduct of the wholesome operation there. So if that is suitable, don't have a problem with that. The other site they talked about is Smalls, and I understand there is some gravel available there. I don't know what they need in total. Just the photo sort of concept plan that was put up on the wall there, though, did show that there was some deficit to the north side of their groin field, and I think as part of a consent process, we would want to be absolutely certain that that deficit is not having an adverse effect on that beach crest, because if it does, it is increasing the risk of overtopping inundation to the wider Halmoana area. So, that is a consenting issue. Happy to sit down with Hastings District Council and work it through, and I am sure that Ian Maxwell and his staff are similarly happy to do the same. So,
Councillor Graham.
There appears to be two issues here, isn't there? We have the issue of Clifton, and we have the issue of the Halmoana Tiawonga groin thing. I would just like a discussion on Clifton, just to kick us off, because I can't see why we would withhold a temporary consent to help those people get through a temporary situation. And I just want to outline that again before you click your little clicker, Sadie.
So there's I'll answer. Sorry.
They want to do, the Hastings City Council want to, or the residents want to extend that 80 metres, that rock formation. The Hastings City Council will do it and pay for it, my understanding, and they will take it away and pay for the taking it away. And it's all about just giving those people time to adjust to, if the situation is as dire as we all think it is, giving people time to adjust and move on. And, I think that these coastal villages which are under attack, we have a responsibility to help them as much as we can. You've got to think of ourselves, if you're living close to them, without them doing too much damage. If they want to use their own money, why wouldn't we give them temporary reprieve until we get a final analysis?
So there's a couple of points here. I mean, this has moved on really to the submissions from the Clifton Marine Club and the Clifton Reserve Society, which we just heard a minute ago. So, but since you've brought it up, there's no reason why we wouldn't give short-term consents to those if they applied for them. And that's all we're saying. We cannot, you as a council, cannot just sit around as part of this decision-making process and resolve to give them temporary consent. It's quite clearly outlined through the Resource Management Act process. But the point was made that when they applied for the temporary protection that's in place now, it took us 6 days to process it. So there's no hold up at this end. Once the information's there, we're in. And we undertook, and we worked with them, and we worked with Hastings district officers as well. The issue at the moment is we don't have anything to work with. There's no consent. We would consider, obviously, actually, try and do it as expeditiously as we did last year, if we had a consent in front of us with the required information. And Ian Maxwell and John O'Shaughnessy at Hastings District have worked really closely together over the past 12 months to get those kind of processes in place. So, I'll reiterate, there's no reason why it couldn't, but it has to go through the normal RMA process, which is make an application, council will consider whether or not it needs to be notified. The last one didn't need to be notified, so there's probably a precedent there. But we need to have some information in front of us to be able to grant a consent with a short-term duration.
I think let's get back to the WOW discussion though, which is where we're at today. There's another decision a few pages along. Councillor Bevan.
Yeah, so it seems to me that there are three things. One is the sources of shingle. Are they available for this purpose, amongst others? The second is the temporary need for them to extend that wall, which is a sort of a
different discussion to this one, though.
Yeah, and they're saying that's a must-do now, basically. Yeah. And then the third one is the Hamoana one, the WOW one, if you like, which I think really is, it probably needs to be incorporated into a sort of a longer-term strategy that involves Hastings, Napier, and the regional council to discuss. And I guess I've got a little bit of concern because you've talked to us previously, Mike, about maybe that's going to take 3 years to develop, and I'm not sure that they've got 3 years up their sleeve. So whether we can somehow prioritise the area to the south of Napier as part of that overview, I'm not quite sure, but that's what we might need to think about. But just in terms of how we deal with this and how we respond to these submissions is what I'm a little bit stuck with, because it's quite clear to me we need to examine the sources of shingle. We need to give them a signal that we're prepared to consider a resource consent application for the extension of that wall, and I'm not quite sure how we go about doing that in an appropriate way.
Yeah, I think you're mixing up two things. The shingles associated with the WOW thing, the Clifton and the wall is completely separate. I mean, we have to consider a resource consent application when we've got one. So, I mean, it's as fundamental as that. Somebody needs to make a decision to apply for resource consent, and if they agree to doing that, that's fine. If they want further information, come and have a chat.
Unless you're giving us a solution for a recommendation, I'll take your last question, and we'll leave this on the table and come back to it tomorrow.
The clarification I would like to establish is that although you've given an indication that the last consent was very straightforward, no political decision can be made to make the consent. It must be considered on merit when it's received. So we cannot even give them an indication, we will give you a consent. Otherwise it'd be ultra-vires.
I don't think
Yeah. Well, it was.
Can I just suggest maybe we leave this on the table, let Mr. Adey have a quiet chat to Gary Clode, just so we've a little more knowledge, and we'll come back to this tomorrow. So I'll adjourn the hearing, and thank you all for your participation.
Sorry, just before you close down, I've just circulated to everyone, I hope, a memo with some attachments being the full correspondence between the Minister and the Napier-Gisborne Rail Establishment Group. Minister Tremaine's submission number 96, I think, had 2 letters from the Minister addressed to the Establishment Group via myself, but did not include the letters and correspondence that led to those responses. So for full context, that's circulated. If you wouldn't mind just having a quick look at those, or stick them in the file together with
thank you.
When we consider Tremaine's submission.
Right, we will now adjourn, and thank you very much. And the watch calls in through there.